Today, the Senate are voting on Section 702. The US Senate is expected to reauthorize the contentious warrantless surveillance powers conferred by Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. That's FISA. I mean, do you ever hear that sound and it not be connected to corruption? And may even strengthen them with language that, according to US Senator Ron Wyden, will force a huge range of companies and individuals to spy for the government. That's not fair. How's that fair? Spying for the government? That's not fair. I'm not doing that. The White House has urged the Senate to swiftly pass this bill before the authority expires on April 19th. So they're on a ticking clock. You bet they're going to get this hurried and through. You notice how, like, people say, reform is a slow process. Sure, we'd like to build a better and fairer and more judicious world, but the wheels of democracy, they sure turn slow. Hey, we've got 24 hours or we're not going to be able to spy on everyone in America. It's done. They can move fast when they need to move fast. You better believe that. If you don't understand the gravity and import of this situation, let's see what Edward Snowden's got to say. The NSA is just days from taking over the internet, and it's not on the front page of any newspaper because no one has noticed. This is a post from, I'm now beginning to realise, a rather brilliant person, Elizabeth Goitein, who writes, "If this bill becomes law, any company or individual that provides any service whatsoever may be forced to assist in NSA surveillance as long as they have access to equipment on which communications are transmitted or stored, such as routers, or maybe you guys say routers, servers, cell towers, etc." Well, that seems to be cause for some concern, doesn't it? Let's learn what Elizabeth Goitein's got to teach us about this new draconian measure that I reckon when we wake up tomorrow will have been passed. Buried in the Section 702 Reauthorization Bill, RISAA, passed by the House on Friday, so it's already been passed by Congress, is the biggest expansion of domestic surveillance since the Patriot Act, which was, of course, a response to an atrocity, the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center, which subsequently led to military interventionism and action in Iraq and Afghanistan, which in retrospect did not make sense, meant that millions of people died, that terrorist organizations were created. It was not a good thing. I'll explain how this new power works, continues Goitein. Under current law, the government can compel electronic communications service providers that have direct access to communications to assist the NSA in conducting Section 702 surveillance. In practice, that means companies like Verizon and Google must turn over the communications of the targets of Section 702 surveillance. The targets must be foreigners overseas, like me, I'm overseas, although the communications can and do include communications with Americans. I'm communicating with Americans right now. You're Americans, right? I'm communicating with you guys right now. And who among you do you not have any foreign friends? Or are you actually what the neoliberal establishment claims? So insular, so locked in national identity that you don't speak with foreigners. I don't think that of you. Through a seemingly innocuous change to the definition of electronic communication surveillance provider, note that fact that it's innocuous, note that fact that it's bureaucratic creep of tyranny once again that we're confronted with, an amendment offered by House Intel Committee, HPSCI leaders, and passed by the House, vastly expands the universe of entities that can be compelled to assist the NSA. If the bill becomes law, any company or individual that provides any service whatsoever may be forced to assist in NSA surveillance as long as they have access to equipment on which communications are transmitted or stored, such as routers, servers, cell towers, etc. That sweeps in an enormous range of US businesses that provide Wi-Fi to their customers and therefore have access to equipment on which communications transit. Barbershops, laundromats, fitness centres, hardware stores, dentist offices, the list goes on and on. Essentially, anywhere that has Wi-Fi would have to hand over information. And you notice as well the manner in which they tack these things on. The extraordinary manner and the covert, sly methods that are deployed to control you, to manipulate and target you. It also includes commercial landlords that rent out the office spaces where tens of millions of Americans go to work every day. Offices of journalists, lawyers, non-profits, financial advisors, healthcare providers and more. When the amendment was first unveiled, one of the FISA court amici took the highly unusual step of sounding a public alarm. Civil liberties advocates noted that the provision would encompass hotels, libraries, and coffee shops. The version of HPSCI leaders offered Friday therefore exempts hotels, library shops and coffee shops, plus a handful of other establishments. But as the FISA court amicus promptly pointed out, the vast majority of US businesses remain fair game. The amendment even extends to service providers who come into our homes. House cleaners, plumbers, people performing repairs and IT service providers have access to laptops and routers inside our homes and could be forced to serve as surrogate spies. What happens to me when I'm reading this? I'm sort of like, oh God, this is sort of a little bit boring. But hold on a minute, what they're doing is they're facilitating endless espionage and spying while hypocritically condemning Julian Assange for espionage and seeking to extradite him. And all right, they're saying they're not going to execute him, but he may have to spend the rest of his life in jail, and he can't say, well, what about free speech? I was a publisher. And now they're increasing these measures. I guess we're going to have to stay calm, because this is pretty extraordinary, isn't it? We can't just get lost in passion. We must somehow remain calm. None of these people or businesses will be allowed to tell anyone about the assistance they were compelled to provide. They would be under gag order, and they would face heavy penalties if they failed to comply with it. So do you see, once again, like when you look at something like 1984 and you see the sort of grey, drab, Soviet-derived dystopic vision that Orwell rendered, that it is in fact accurate in terms of the power and ability of centralised forces to dominate and control. But the aesthetic is very much Brave New World. Sublime, divine, sweet, anodyne, astringent, clean and hygienic dictatorships where drones immaculately fly and rationally dispense with opponents of the state, where sovereign nations are of course free to make their own decisions, and you are of course not free to decide whether or not you want your taxes to continue to fund foreign wars, to continue to fund censorship that ultimately prohibits you from learning the truth, or if not learning the truth, having access to a variety of opposing opinions and then forming your own view and taking your own choices for yourself, for your family, for your community. They want your reality curated and pre-chewed, and they want you docile, supine, on a chair, obedient and broken. That's not the worst part. Unlike Google and Verizon, most of these businesses and individuals lack the ability to isolate and turn over a target's communications, so they would be required to give NSA access to the equipment itself, or to use techniques or devices presumably provided by the NSA to copy and turn over entire communication streams and or repositories of stored communications, which would inevitably include vast quantities of wholly domestic communications. I urge you, if you've not seen the documentaries, I think it's called Citizen 4, is it Citizen 4? When Snowden made these revelations, he was like a person that had been given a epiphany, a glimpse into another world. He's frantic. They can spy on you through your phones. They're listening to what they could be listening to us right now. We still live in the vision granted to us by Snowden, conveyed, not that particular piece of journalism, but comparable revelations were made by Assange. We are appraised and apprised of the information. They've told us at great sacrifice the truth. The NSA having wholesale access to domestic communications on an unprecedented scale would then be on the honour system to pull out and retain only the communications of approved foreign targets. Let that sink in. HPSCI leaders deny that the administration has any intent to use this provision so broadly. Supposedly, there is a single type of service provider that the government wants to rope in, but they didn't want anyone to know what that service provider was, so they hid the real goal by writing the amendment as broadly and vaguely as possible. Do you see how often broad, vague legislation is being passed in Ireland, the hate laws, in Canada, the online safety and security, in the UK, in the EU, coming to a country somewhere near you, vague language that always seems to afford them more power. But no worries, Americans, the administration isn't actually going to use all the power it just persuaded the House to give it. I cannot overstate how mind-blowingly irresponsible that is. I don't think any administration should be trusted with an Orwellian power like this one. And remember what you're told all the time. Trump is the potential dictator. Trump is the authoritarian. Trump is the man that will turn the courts against his political opponents. Trump is what you must fear. If you vote for anyone other than Biden, then you are an enemy of democracy. Vote for just one person. That's what democracy means now. We must support democracy in Ukraine. Ukraine, whose democracy has become somewhat stripped back since they've taken control of the media and stopped elections and shut down political opposition, which is, you could argue, understandable during a war. It all becomes a little more difficult to understand when you appreciate that there was a treaty on the table, but between the United States and the UK, Zelensky was persuaded not to sign it. What extraordinary times. There are certain powers a government should not have in a democracy. The ability to force ordinary businesses and individuals to serve as surrogate spies is one of them. Yeah, I'll vote for that. I'll vote for that. Like, if this is something that's been passed by Congress and is likely to get passed by the Senate, do you not think that it's potentially time for us to look at new systems of government? It doesn't seem to be working very well. Even if the targets are supposed to be foreigners, a power this sweeping will be abused. Well, whether it's the ongoing trials and incarceration of Julian Assange or the escalation of powers such as this, it's pretty clear that we are living in a 360 sphere of total power where the legacy media, judiciary and government are all individually weapons within globalist artillery that won't rest until we are all entirely subjugated. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.